So Wednesday, there was a vote on two resolutions to block U.S. military sales to Israel, and the resolutions did not pass. But they showed, in the words of The Hill, how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has fractured historically bipartisan support in Congress over the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip in Israel's war against Hamas. Now, these resolutions, the first one, 27 to 70, and that was going to block more than 675 million in weapon sales to Israel. And then the second one had 24 votes and 73 against, and that was going to prohibit the sale of tens of thousands of fully automatic assault rifles. When they asked Sanders about the vote, he said, "Whatever happens tonight, history will condemn those of us who fail to act in the face of these horrors." And I always try to find a way to look at whatever positives come out of something. There was a time where if you said something about Israel, you could not see anything but bipartisan condemnation. But in the last 5, 6, 7 years, you're watching something historic with regard to congressional support for that region. I just kind of want to go over some of these specific votes on one of the resolutions. This is the one that had 27 to 70. The first one I mentioned. Again, half the Democrats, about half of them, the caucus, voted for this, which again is such a big deal because in the past it used to be 2, 3, 4, 5, single digit number of people. But I also want to go over specifically what members, just certain ones that stand out to me. Well, first of all, it's a disgrace that, supposed moderate Republicans like, Rand Paul, Collins, Murkowski, people who have shown that they can buck with their party on something that most of them don't believe in or would support, just like a rubber stamp. It's sad that they didn't support this resolution because a lot of their statements and actions with regard to Israel have actually been decent in the past. The four, I should say, that stand out the most to me are Booker and Gillibrand, and then my own senators Padilla and Schiff. Now, I'll address Booker and Gillibrand first. So these are two individuals, and Bennett is in there as well, who ran for president, you know, in the second to last election cycle, 2020. And what I think is so amazing about these politicians is that one, they're not that old, right? They're people who are, in their 50s, 40s, whatever. But what I also find interesting is how they just cannot modernize themselves or adapt. See, most of them, as we've talked before, are focused on what George Wallace called Me Tooism, but what I call careerism, which is where a person will take positions to advance their career and really has no actual ideology of their own. But with all that money coming in from AIPAC, they are very adamant about sticking with them because they think in the short term that's going to benefit their either continued runs for the Senate or another possible run for president from each of them. And it just shows you why people like that should not ever really be in elected office, but more especially think they can lead the U.S. You have to have some level of a core ideology, and beyond that, some ability to look at where the tides are turning. There is a clear, palpable number of people who are growing disenfranchised with with respect to this humanitarian crisis and just Israel's government in general, and Netanyahu, all of it. So to keep siding with them, oh, we'll sell them more arms, we'll give them more rifles. It's disgusting, and it just shows how out of touch they are with a lot of their constituents. I mean, hell, Gillibrand is from the state where where the largest city, New York City, is close to being run by you look, Mamdani is not anti-Semitic. He criticizes the Israeli government, but someone who is on, I think we could all agree, pro-Palestine. So it's interesting how she's another one of these remnants of just with how things used to be, back in like 2010 and even 15. They're just not able to pick up on the shift. Now, speaking of Schiff and One source called him pathetic Padilla. So according to Track APAC, Schiff gets about somewhere over 6 million from different from the pro-Israel lobby, and then Padilla gets about 30,000. And what's so sad about Padilla is this is a guy who only a few months ago, right? I am being thrown down for asking questions, and this is undemocratic. And it's like, dude, you're the same one who has no problem signing off on the bombing and starving of children in other regions. And what's so pathetic when you contrast that with his, very pro human rights stance in his own country, just the hypocrisy. We can treat people like human beings, or we should treat people like human beings in the U.S. But when it comes to these other regions, kill them all. At least they're Palestinian anyway. You look at a guy like this, and you say to yourself, what's so pathetic about him is that he's really not receiving that much from the pro-Israel lobby. He's getting 30,000, which for a normal person is a lot of money, but for a statewide politician in the largest state in the union, there's really not much you can do it, especially when you contrast it with the 6 million that Schiff gets. Like, it's bad to sell out one way or the other, but at least with Schiff getting 6 million, I could say, okay, well, this is an amount of money where he probably feels like if he were to even just call for humanitarian aid and say, hey, look, we have to stop this, they might take it away, and then he might not be able to run for senator in the next 4 or 5 years. But with Padilla, it's just so embarrassing because they're really not giving him that much money, and he's just as sold out as the person that they're giving millions to. So I guess his price tag is a lot smaller than Schiff's. And I just want to also say this: I find it so ironic because people get mad at individuals like Jimmy Dore and TYT back when they weren't doing whatever they're doing now, where they say, oh, both sides are the same, both parties are the same, and just different rhetoric that goes along with this idea that voting for one doesn't beseat you from the result of were the other one to get in power. And this is the kind of stuff where it's like an affirmation of both, in the sense that it's really sad to watch Democrats, right, from the supposed most liberal states of California and New York voting the same way as the conservative Southerners who are just going to back Israel no matter what, like Tim Scott and Rick Scott, and just these different figures. But what is really interesting is that the fact that so many of them, right, almost half of the caucus, or even half of the caucus, right, about half of them, are now on record as having voted to block this, should be seen as some evidence that the pressure of the public is getting to them. That Democrats are slowly, piece by piece, right? It's not all the way. It's not even. You could argue it's not even halfway because we don't know what the specific number of them in the House would vote for this would be. But the fact that this went from like 13, 14 to 18 to now 26 or 27 rather in this first vote, and then 20 something in the other vote, shows that if enough people say something, pressure them, condemn them, criticize them, you can move most of them. Because, like I said, the biggest priority for a politician, it's not about protecting people, making sure others are all right. 90-some% of them are just there for, again, careerism. But the biggest, most important thing to them is keeping their job. And if they feel like they might lose their seat because of this one vote or issue, they're going to change. You just have to keep piling enough pressure on them. So this is sad because, like I said, I don't like being in a country where, it's called what it is, they're more loyal to a foreign government than their own people, right? Because if you went and said, hey, let's take the millions of dollars for these rifles and use that for schooling or infrastructure, you would get voted down by most Republicans, by a good chunk of Democrats, right? They're against using any of the funds that we have to help people in their own region. But when it comes to white knighting for some other country, here they go, here they come. And man, it's but the one good thing about this vote is the proof that things can change. They might not be moving as fast as we would like, but there has been real progress in terms of getting them more and more to say, hey, enough is enough. And we just have to keep the pressure up. Schumer is sitting there thinking he's going to be majority leader one day. I would love, besides him getting primaried, for this to become a central issue of the reelection campaigns of all these people. Just, hey, you can't serve in Congress if you are completely apathetic to a genocide. Um, and some of the rhetoric is so disgusting, right? Where you see them try to say that all the Palestinians basically are getting what they deserve because of their affiliation with Hamas, even though they haven't had an election in, was it 19 years, since like 2006, just crazy stuff. But I think if we really make the point to Democrats, right, through all these protests, through the refusal to donate to them, hey, I'm not supporting you if you support a genocide. Um, that if enough of us do that, it can make a difference, and we've seen it here. So, with regard to my own embarrassing lawmakers, right, I've never donated or supported Schiff or Padilla at all. That's not going to make any difference to me. I'll just keep calling them out more, and I hope that people do the same thing with their senators and congressmen. Politicians are not going to save us, but if enough of us go after them and make them think they could lose their seats, that's what causes the cracks in the dam of Israel bootlicking to finally take hold.